Yes, we are live. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to our expert session number 79. And today we are joined by Hendrik Lopscher. So, let me introduce you guys to Hendrik. So, Hendrik is a leading e commerce analyst and consultant, recognized for his deep insights into global marketplaces and online retail strategy. He's the founder and chief analyst at Blue Cap Ventures. So Hendrik draws from more than a decade of experience working with some of the largest e-commerce business in Africa and advertising brands, investors, and startups worldwide. He's known for his practical expertise in interpreting earning calls, developing actionable strategies, and making sense of complex marketplaces trends across both established and emerging platforms. Hendrik
hmm
also curates a widely read newsletter and frequently shares his perspectives on the evolving nature of success in e-commerce. So, Hendrik, welcome to our expert session number 79. And well, I need also to thank our sponsors, so Airmeet, for providing us this great platform for having our expert sessions, PagBank, Sinatra AI, Braze, and Edesk. And so, Hendrik, to open our conversations, why is the definition of success in e-commerce so controversial? And who really gets to decide if a marketplace, brand, or founder is winning?
So, Gustavo, firstly, thank you for having me. I can't believe I'm session number 79. Holy hell, you guys have been busy. Um, Let me start off by saying that I think this question is the question that most people in our sector has on their minds. Whether you're an executive, an entrepreneur, an investor, this is the question about success. And at the end of the day, we as old heads, and I use that word as nicely as I can, folks that have experience, we tend to have a very different view of this. But let me start at the beginning. I was out of university or school when I joined my first company. I was employee number 4 or 5, dependent on the count, price check. And we were 5 people at our maximum. And then we were acquired by Naspers, arguably the largest investor in emerging markets. They've now evolved into investing in pretty much any company around the world, dependent on their thesis. And then we were sold to uh, something akin to an accelerator, Silvertree Holdings. The reason why this conversation has got my attention so far is because the fact remains is that there are people working inside businesses, and some of the people, these entrepreneurs, are either chasing an exit, or they want to build a 100-year or $1 billion business. But the challenge that I consistently see in my consulting business, as well as just reading the news, is that nobody really knows what success is. Is success having a $1 billion valuation? I think not. For me, the best example of that is that I live on the African continent, and Jumia had a $1 billion valuation, yet the company has not made a single dollar profit thus far. So valuation for me is a vanity metric that makes really no sense, but it was the flavor of the month. Then you get the the assumption that e-commerce is easy, which I think is not the case. And that whole sector of people believe that the moment that you get onto TechCrunch or insert whatever name of any publication and you've announced funding, you've made it. The truth for me remains that success in e-commerce takes a lot of time. So I believe that success in e-commerce happens anytime between years 6 and 9. of the company's founding. So there's no overnight um, success. Maybe now with these AI companies that basically claim that they've become the fastest business to $100 million in ARR or whatever. But in our sector in commerce, you don't have a predefined determination of success. One of the things that I did when I was at Christchurch was I started traveling because if you're in an emerging market, so I'm in South Africa, we have a very small e-commerce market. It's now only recently gotten to 5% of retail. I wanted to understand how success looks like. So what do you think I did? I got onto a plane and I traveled to America. I went to the States twice. The first visit was at a time when Uber was still very much black cabs, mostly in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco. And I realized very quickly that there's nothing different. It's just the scale of the market is larger. The amount of investment that is required is significantly more in order to get in front of consumers. And then you have all these other side elements, such as Yelp and others, where potentially your success could be on the line. And suddenly I thought, but wait, what? I thought this is the land of milk and honey, and everybody is successful. Um,
Mhm.
and I left going home thinking like, what did I just witness? Then 2 years later, I get onto an airplane and I go to Turkey. So inside Naspers, we had an in the comp they were the largest shareholder in a business called Marcofoni. So Marcofoni was essentially the largest flash sales platform in all of Turkey. It was a ginormous business. And I was lucky enough to go to an executive management event in Turkey, and I got to meet some folks. So I got to have a conversation with the CEO
Mhm.
of Microphony. Now, I will just mention that the CEO and founder of Microphony is a gentleman by the name of Sina Afra, which I believe he could make the argument that he's one of Turkey's best entrepreneurs ever. But I'll never forget sitting in his office and thinking that this entrepreneur understands success because he worked at eBay before the time. And I was absolutely mind blown with the conversation that I had. Little did I know, sitting in that office that day, Gustavo, that 2 years later the business would be shut down because the investor didn't believe that there was enough growth available for them to justify them having money and gotten money from an investor. So, in a
Mhm.
long winded way, I've been trying to understand success from all of my commerce career because one, I think if you're a driven individual, you want to understand what you need to chase, i.e., what does this look like? Two,
Mhm.
if you work with entrepreneurs, as I do, and most of the folks on this call do, you, I believe, you have a duty to help other entrepreneurs not make the same mistakes that has happened in your own career. So that for me is another situation where is that potentially a successful moment, or are we driven by dashboards, GMV, financial statistics that are basically driven outside the financial department? And the point that I'm trying to make here is that my long-winded way is that I don't believe that I've seen success. I think I've experienced it because I was very lucky. But I think we need, as a sector, to understand that success is not what we think it is.
Mhm. Yes, and yeah, I think, well, if we go only and if we go solely for the success interpretation. I believe that could be basically personal for each one. But
Agreed.
when we talk about e-commerce, and not only e-commerce as itself, but all aspects around e-commerce. So how do you think that the definitions of success shift between marketplaces, brands, startups, and investors? Uh, do you see like that uh, these this chain, so marketplace, brand, startup, and investors, do they see success different as different from each other?
So the answer is a resounding yes. So let's take it from the top step. So as a
Mhm,
marketplace, what is your barometer of success? It is having the most amount of sellers, inventory available, almost like an endless aisle. So you have the most sellers, but also on the other side of the marketplace, you need to ensure that you are acquiring and retaining the most amount of consumers so that you have the network effect to ensure that your business grows without you having to spend significant on marketing. Yes, I do know that you need to spend some dollars, but so as a marketplace, you have very specific requirements for success. Now we
mhm,
go one step down. As a brand, I believe brands don't completely understand what success is because in most cases I believe brand success is directly related to finance. How
mhm,
can we make the most profit? Because we have three cost centers. We have the people cost center, we have the logistics cost center, and we have the advertising cost center. So where can we try and be the most profitable to ensure that we have a runway to ensure that we can stick around for as many years as possible? Then one step down, as a startup, having worked for a few of them in my life, I think startups have the most interesting dynamics for success because what you are trying to do is you are trying to take market share away from your competitor, whether it's a larger business, whether it's a marketplace, whether it's a brand. You are trying to grow in a manner in which one, nobody knows about you until you are large enough so that you can potentially raise funding or have
mhm,
generated enough revenue so that you don't need to do this. But getting to that point for me, and I know this is most probably going to have people in the audience all up in arms, but I think product market fit, while it may sound like a redundant term, I think startups have to understand that you have to find your own way of what does product market fit look. Is it, uh, you know, having enough customers of your product? Is it having enough traffic? It's all dependent on what the startup does. And then, in the last one is the investor.
mhm,
And let me be very frank here, whether it's venture capital, hedge funds, private equity, it all boils down to numbers. They all want access to financial information. They all want the opportunity to potentially make an early bet or make an investment to generate capital in different stages. So a venture investor in most cases want they have a 9 to a 10-year fund limit. So you want to make money by year 9 or 10. Ideally, you want a 10x return. A private equity investor, in my experience, they do the buying and selling thing in year 7 in the hopes that the asset that they have bought and made other acquisitions worth has generated enough success, in most cases revenue, so that it can be sold to the highest bidder. And then for
mhm,
the hedge fund wants the venture investment that they have made whether it's a late stage investment, in most cases, they want that investment to provide them with a higher rate than what they can get in the financial markets. The point that you've highlighted with this conversation is you have four different sets of what success could mean. And
Mhm.
I think the biggest challenge with that is that entrepreneurs tend to have a very narrow focus of what success is. And you almost probably have a good chuckle now, but in most cases, success for a startup is how can we just stay alive? How can we
Mhm.
just have enough money in the bank to pay our staff, to pay to pay our traffic bills, i.e., all the web stuff that's requirements. Now you need to pay also these AI platforms. So at the end of the day, all of these different businesses have different metrics, but I believe that most entrepreneurs don't understand that the metric or the North Star for the business is what you want it to be. Is it,
Mhm.
I'm going to stay, I'm not going to raise funding. So you're an example like MailChimp, where you get acquired and the founders make a significant amount of money, or is your big thing, and in you are what I call an operator, in the sense that you build a company so that you can sell the company, you make some
Mhm.
money, and then your next thing is that you want to redo the whole process. There are people like that in our world, Gustavo, and
Mhm.
I think the biggest challenge for people in our sector is to understand what matters for them. So I believe in the current era we are right now, and I'm not saying anything out of school, is that the biggest driver now for success is profitability. We are no longer in a growth at all uh, mode. Blitz scaling, or whatever Reid Hoffman called it, that no longer is available because the investment sector of our businesses no longer want to provide capital, because unless they are seeing growth in a organic matter that makes sense, they won't write checks. I do
Mhm.
some work for investors, and I can tell you that due diligence has gone very quiet. During the pandemic, I did so much due diligence that I actually ever wondered if I was going to actually do normal work again. But
Mhm.
now, due diligence basically is like maybe twice a quarter if I'm lucky. And then the argument is made by whether it's the general partner or the investment committee, is, do we really want to write a check for this? Because we
Mhm.
might not actually make money off of this investment. So the whole cycle is different now. And I think, as I say again, this is why this topic is near and dear to my heart, because as somebody that's been in e-commerce for 15 or 16 or 17 plus years, you get to a place where you want to help people be successful, but you
Mhm.
also want to understand what success looks like. And I
Yeah.
just continue to believe that we don't know how that looks.
Mhm. Yeah, and let me bring it so this success metric. So, uh, well, you're as an e-commerce analyst, and you, as you said, you work with a lot of due diligence, and we'll talk about a bit further around your work as an analyst. So listening and participating in the earning calls and reading all those reports and etc.
Yeah.
But um, around that, just before connecting to the success metrics you were talking about. So do you believe that the success metrics which success metrics are overrated for boards, and what signals should leaders pay more attention to? because uh, as we can see, and I believe that that connects with what you were saying and what we said before, that for each category
Yeah.
the success metric is different. But and sometimes I believe that the success metrics that the boards are looking at are not connected with the customer, uh, with what the customers want from
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
specific company. I won't say brand, but that specific company, wherever that is. What do
So
you believe? So
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 which type of
you've
metrics
asked-
do you believe that are most overrated in the
so
boards?
yeah. So what is the so I will say I think one of the most overrated metrics in marketplaces is the GMV, the gross merchandise value, in the sense that it's good and well to tell me that you've had so much billions of dollars going through your platform, but how much revenue are you actually making from that? What is your take rate? So when I look at marketplaces, I want to know what the take rate is of that specific marketplace. Secondly, um, I I also want to know as an analyst, and I listen for this, is I want to know what the profit margin for the business is. So I want to know, does this business have a good profit margin where they are making more than 15 to 20% profit annually or quarterly? If they do that, you have my attention. The other one that I look at for is customer acquisition costs, or in public companies, it's it's the cost of business. How much money, it's not cost of business, it's cost of sales. How much money is the business spending to generate a $1 or one real or €1 worth of revenue? I tend to think that this is another metric where boards can kind of get lost, where you have this argument inside businesses that, look, why we are, our cost per acquisition, or cost of acquisition costs, the CAC costs, are increasing, and it'll be okay because customers will stay with us, or we'll generate long-term relationships. No, you can't say that. I think the biggest thing is that if you listen to earnings, you have to listen to revenue. So let's not even talk about public companies. Let's talk about private companies. Private companies, how much revenue are you generating? How much profit are you generating from said revenue? Are you not making losses? Are you actually making a profit? If the answer is yes, I'm making a profit, then that's great, because in most cases, it takes businesses years to get to profitability. And in most cases, profitability becomes a massive driver for funding or an exit, because nobody wants to buy a business where you are spending $1.50 to generate $1 worth of revenue. Nobody wants to do that. As much as they tell you it's fine, but they don't. Then I think the other metric that I've gotten to love, especially in the software as a service space, and in most cases also marketplaces, is what is the churn rate? You know, are you
Mhm.
churning sellers? Are you churning customers? What is your, how well are you retaining your customers? Are you having to spend money to retain customers? At the end of the day, to answer your question, I think the most overhyped metric that I continuously see is, there's two. One is the valuation of a business, because let's be honest, valuations is like a dark science. Nobody really knows how you get to that valuation. So that's a problem. But then, especially in businesses where you have, GMV, or you have sell through rates, you know, are these actually giving you like the heartbeat of the company? And I believe the answer is a resounding no, because there are a bunch of things that are not being communicated to the team and to the board because you have these blind spots. And that leads me to, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to have people on your board that are willing to disagree with you and to keep you on the short and narrow. Why? Because if you don't have people asking the right questions, you can go into the wrong directions. You can start making losses. You can start having to make big decisions because your business is not growing in the right metric. And yet
Mhm.
again, this comes back to the point that I made earlier. We as a sector have been bamboozled by publications that success comes easy and it's overnight. No, 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 no. I hate to break it to you. Success in our sector is a lot of hard work. You need a lot of people inside your business and outside of business to help you get to that place where you have profitability, where you have a cash generating business, where the monies that are generated aren't being paid to partners, but it's actually being kept in the business's bank accounts. And you're able to generate revenue so that you can either reinvest in the business or you can go and start to do experiments and then
Mhm.
potentially grow new business opportunities.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, so one point that it brings me is like the the board the board room is not a place for friends, right? It's not a place where the company leader should go and say, okay, so everyone will say yes to me, and everything that I'm doing is great. So it's actually a place where the leadership of the company uh, should be challenging, right? So uh, it's it's it's, uh, it's not that it should be like an uncomfortable place, but it should be a place for challenging, right? So because otherwise makes no sense. Just to have some people being well paid, and the majority of them are just saying yes, go. Should looks great. So um,
The
so
best
that
business, the best
yeah.
business, Gustavo, have
Mhm.
a really good board of directors where the CEO or the leadership of the business has visibility forwards and backwards. But what do I mean with that is that you have board members that have experience of the sector, so they understand the challenges that you have going potentially forward, but they
Mhm.
also have people on their board that can help them negate all the challenges that could potentially be seen inside financial documentation, inside the team, and all kinds of stuff.
Mhm.
And that is another challenge that I see is that, and I think it's a really good point that you make. The best businesses have leadership or management teams and boards of directors where there is an environment of there's it's not difficult, but there's an environment of we allow people to disagree, but we also want conversation to ensure that we have complete 360 visibility of potential challenges as well as potential opportunities. That is just the reality. And to your point, I think the one most important thing for entrepreneurs is that I tend to believe that an entrepreneur should, by year 4 of their business, you should have a few people around you that play the role of a board of directors, i.e., people that can help the entrepreneur decode situations and help them make sense of it and help them
Mhm.
solve challenges. Until you generate profit and revenues, it doesn't make sense for companies to have boards. But remember, as soon as you take money from outside investors, you need to have a board of directors. You need to have uh, committees to ensure that these fiduciary duties being done to ensure that there isn't you don't become a Business Insider headline of or some headline about theft or fraud. But it's really important that the business has a
Mhm.
culture of we need to ensure that there's a challenging event and circumstances so that leadership and those inside the business understand that it's never finished. We are never done. We never have. We can enjoy success, but we shouldn't be celebrating success for things such as raising money or all of that stuff. It's based on performance.
Mhm. Yeah. And let let me let me get back more to marketplace. So, um, what what have you seen so from lessons? So, what patterns have you seen in how success is built across global platforms like Amazon and Alibaba compared to new these new emerging marketplaces
Okay.
or and also platforms like JD, and now we have all of these Chinese platforms, also Temu and a bunch of others.
Okay. So the older, more established marketplaces such as Alibaba and Amazon, they have cultures where so Alibaba's internal culture is one of they want to create 100-year business, 100-year-old business,
Hmm.
and that they do with decision making, and that they do with their leadership structure, where they have a partnership of all of most of the founders, but as well as people inside various important divisions that communicate like monthly or quarterly outside of their quarterly results. Success for Alibaba is defined by them by helping generate more commerce and helping small businesses grow in markets like similar to China. Um, Amazon's success has been one in which they have leveraged opportunities,
Hmm.
whether it's not paying tax, whether it's legislatory changes, whether it's a very hard business culture inside the business, so that you have the best of the best staff, which they no longer unfortunately have. Their success has basically been driven by their share price. And because they have the share price, they're able to raise money from public markets and invest heavily inside businesses that are generally either high margin, hello Amazon Web Services, or low margin, hello Amazon Advertising. Sorry. If you look at the newest business, the newest market, the newest generation of marketplaces, and I think it's important for me to say that, is that I think we as a sector need to understand that these marketplaces are like organisms, and they continue to evolve and grow. And these Chinese marketplaces like Temu and Shein, they are no longer the same businesses that they were when they launched in your country. In most cases, they are now trying to do the local to local
Hmm.
situation. They are looking to find local sellers so that they can utilize the various, eyeballs that they've generated from their low cost pricing. Thus, they now have. So I believe the newer generation of marketplaces, the Sheins, the Temus, at the moment their core success metrics are how many local sellers do they have in those markets, and how many of those local sellers are having the opportunity to sell local goods to consumers inside their markets. It's no longer about selling Chinese goods via,
Mhm.
cross border. Um, but I also think, and this is not a point that I thought about. This is a point that my dear friend Vinny O'Brien has mentioned, is that a lot of these Chinese marketplaces have also started hiring experienced operators that worked for the eBays, the Amazons, the Alibabas, and
Mhm.
thus they're able to understand the potential future challenges that these businesses have. But I think at the end of the day, in most cases, these businesses, with the exception of Sheen, which is private, their success metrics are driven by profitability and the opportunity for them to communicate, what their future success could look like. Just yesterday, Alibaba announced that they are going to significantly increase their investment into artificial intelligence, and the
Mhm.
markets in the United States loved it, and their share price increased. Whereas, if you think of other more established marketplaces like eBay or Etsy or I'm just trying to think of Zalando. These businesses now have to show significant growth uh, as a way to showcase success to their shareholders. But we also have to talk about that in Europe, you now have regulation where these platforms have to now there's more liability for them. So the point that I'm trying to make is that you have the older guys, the older
Mhm.
platforms, the Amazons and the Alibabas that are looking for growth in parts of their business not traditionally aligned with their marketplace. Whereas the newer generation of marketplaces, the Sheens, the Temus, and whoever else, they are looking for more sellers, more inventory, more opportunities for them to get buyers or customers to buy goods from them. I know I'm trying to make this as fundamentally simple as possible, but I
Mhm.
think we as a sector need to be very mindful that we sometimes overcomplicate things. It's literally as simple as they want more sellers, they want more local sellers because of geopolitical pressures and them facing challenges in multiple markets. What I find super interesting about these newer marketplaces like the Sheens and Temus, and I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, is that it's only the emerging markets like Brazil, like Mexico, like South Africa, like India that have said that India said, you're not selling your goods in our market, it's not going to happen. Whereas in Mexico, Brazil, in South Africa, we have said you can sell into our markets, but we are going to have tariffs and costs to ensure that we protect our local businesses. And at the end of the day, for me, these platforms have now gotten so big that we need to ensure that they do the right thing to
Mhm.
not harm communities. I know I'm talking about utopia here, but marketplaces have such scale that, and by no means are they saints. They all have their own challenges and issues, but platforms have responsibilities.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree. And well, we have great people here to talk about marketplace, and I would love to invite them. I just like Luke and Rafael. Uh, I'd like to following at this topic. I just have one more question, and then we can start inviting them to talk. But following that, as you were saying, so we have Amazon and Alibaba and all of uh, uh, the sub brands like for the
Yeah.
D2C, let's say, for the marketplace to consumers, direct consumers. And we said Shine, we said Temu, and all of these others. So, and that for me is always a question that I like to ask when I talk with people around marketplaces and brands and etc. So, is marketplace only for and the sellers there and the marketplaces, they are only looking for who has the lowest price at the end of the day, because sometimes that's what it seems to me. Like it's hard for, we know we have, as you said, Zalando is not a marketplace only for low prices, but they are based on discount from better
Yeah.
from more premium brands, let's say. But is marketplace only a place for a place only for discounts or low prices? What do you see around about that?
So that's a loaded question that you're asking me. So thank you very much for that. Look, I think with the Chinese platforms going into various markets, so let's talk about a platform that's very near and dear to my heart, and that's Mercado Libre. So Mercado
Mm,
Libre in Brazil is having to invest in shipping and bringing down, uh, minimum uh, the minimum price for free shipping because of the impact that Temu is and Shopee is having in their markets. To answer your question, I think marketplaces selling commoditized goods, I do sometimes believe that it's a race to the bottom, and I think that's a challenge because um, these marketplaces are incentivizing the sellers on their platforms to offer the lowest price, because if you don't have the lowest price, you don't have the buy box. Then on the other hand, you have luxury platforms such as the in the luxury space. um I'm just trying to think of their names. There's a business in Germany that owns uh Saks and Bergdorf Goodman and the like. The point is that not all marketplaces are uh, a race to the bottom because they are selling higher priced items. I think the challenge becomes, as I said, if you're selling commoditized goods that are made in the thousands by manufacturers all around the world, it literally boils down to price. Whereas if you are selling goods that are made, like there's like 20 of them made a year, whether it's a luxury bag or a jacket or a pair of shoes, and it's not commoditized, and it costs a fair amount of money. Think of, let's say 500 to 1,000 euros. you know yes, they can have lower price available to it, but I think marketplaces by design in most cases favor the race to the bottom, but it's not the entire case. That for me boils down to the marketplace incentivizing lower priced goods. You don't need to incentivize it because it doesn't benefit the sellers, because what are you essentially doing? You are cannibalizing your sellers, and thus they are going to most probably churn and leave your platform. Whereas if you have controls around pricing, you're able to ensure that people stay on the platform for longer and can create businesses on marketplaces that generate enough money for them to have success on the platform.
Great. Yeah. I think well, at the end of the day, it will all depends on the position of 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 the marketplace and where they want to position themselves. I know that we have marketplaces focused on uh, premium brands and high ticket brands, but well, what it gets to us, so it's more like the a discount based solution. So, but well,
Just
welcoming Luke, please.
Yeah, hello. Really interested to hear the conversation so far, and it's interesting. I mean, I work for a company, and we have where the software obviously in the background that helps them either do range extension or transform and become a marketplace. I've seen we have customers of ours using our platform to go turn into a mass marketplace with a very, very wide range of assortment, everything from lower cost goods up to premium brands. I have one of our marketplaces in Australia. It's an airline, but they focus more on they don't have hundreds of thousands of products. They have, approximately 30,000, and it's really just focused on luxury items as well. And one of the ones that I really like working with in the UK is a telco. And again, you go to their website and you can obviously buy your telco products, your mobile phones, get your broadband subscription. Now they're doing complementary range extension into things like they're already quite strong in the gaming category. Well, now they're doing third-party range extension into a bit deeper gaming chairs, kind of custom rigs, a bit more in the CE space, TVs, great monitors, and all those different kinds of things. And the value that they're adding their existing customer base, of course, is more range as a starting point.
Yeah.
But they've already got some capability in the business to add. You already have a mobile phone, for example. Oh, you want to have this extra product? Well, just add it to your bill. Add the PlayStation 5 to your phone bill, and pay that for 24 months, over your, 20 quid for 24 months. And that's an example of where you're providing convenience. I shop on Amazon all the time. On occasions I'll do some shopping with some of our marketplace customers, but it's not as convenient as Amazon. I know they've got the range. We were having an interesting conversation at a dinner last night, which is how much are people buying just brands that they recognize? And I said, it's interesting. My buying habits have changed in the sense of, I know I'm buying from Amazon, and I know if it was really wanted to hunt around for that same product, I could find it cheaper elsewhere. I could get it probably cheaper from the manufacturer, but I know I can get it, at 10 p.m. at night, and it's coming the next day. Rain, hail, shine, it's happening, and so why I shop. So that's convenience. But I think, and it's a bit of a rambling kind of response, but some of the most successful marketplaces that we work with are the omni-channel ones already. They're already someone that has a great commerce experience. They've probably got a great loyalty platform. They've got a great store network. And when you start really adding all those pieces to the puzzle together, it turns into an extremely powerful outcome. And an example being, well, start doing range extension with third-party products. Okay, well, then next evolution, let's make those third-party products click and collectible within your own store network. So you're then driving footfall, you're driving traffic. You've got the person in store now. Well, okay, they bought the drone. Let's upsell them the memory card. Let's upsell them the warranty. And you're suddenly building all this additional, not only value for you as an organization, but convenience for the customer as well, let alone all the financing and all those other kind of things as well. So it doesn't necessarily, you'll always have price conscious customers, of course, and again, So there is that. But if it was a marketplace purely just around race to the bottom, you're one of many offering a very similar offering. So then it's really hard to differentiate. What do you do then? Acquisition costs go up, squeezing your sellers, all those different kinds of things, and you wither on the vine, unfortunately. But yeah, I find it a fascinating space.
Yeah, and I just came to me also some. It's not. But I think is as you said. So a lot of telco companies are building marketplaces. A lot of fintechs and in Brazil we have a lot of examples of fintechs building their marketplaces, and it's also like a possibility for I believe that what could happen is for us to have like we'll have this concentration of this huge marketplace. They will like at some point they will make basically stabilize the market, and we'll have this huge marketplace as we have the supermarket chains and something like that. But it will also open space for like let's say clothing chains. They can create their own marketplace for their own brands, and there they will have the possibility to have more brand experience, because it's all of them. So you have a clothing chain that have 10 brands. They can build their own marketplace and more tailored with their branding experiences for each brand and etc. And then that whole group can drive traffic and eyes to there. What do you guys think about it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the case.
I don't know if that already happens.
Well, Henrik and I were talking just about this the other day as well, and it was, is a marketplace for everyone? No, but there's so many. The fact that I work for a company called Marketplace, it can be it's on one hand it's quite obvious what we do, but at the other hand, it's not just about turning everyone into a marketplace, because becoming a marketplace isn't for everyone. And again, but there's so many fascinating ways where people use our platform. It can be a bit of an incubator. They might go with a lower cost commercial model where they're capped to a certain amount of products, and they might then look internally and go, what an unprofitable range within our first party range, and let's move it, flipping some of that into a third party model. It could be big and bulky, something that's a pain in the ass to actually fulfill. And then, or it could be looking at it the other way as well, is if you have a massive retailer with a massive amount of stores, when you're going out to the market and finding suppliers, you need to make sure that they actually, is it worth my while to put them through the procurement process? Do they actually have the inventory and the products, the range and the inventory to actually be able to get in all our stores? Maybe not. So you might start using a marketplace range extension strategy to go, we'll start them on a marketplace model and take commission on sale, prove it, and then potentially move them to a drop ship model, control the margin a bit more. If they're still getting those right signals, then consider actually ranging them in store. So yeah, it's a really interesting one, what people are using with these kind of technologies. But yeah, another thing, and I was thinking, was just around service as well. So buying the product is one thing. Telco example before, of course, you can now buy a flat panel TV with your mobile phone, but the service side of it is a big value add as well. How you actually offer a service to hang the wall on the TV and set it up and take the box away, and let alone the warranties and things like that. So it's just how do you make it easy for me is a big thing as well. It's a convenience thing for me first and foremost.
I tend to agree with that, and I think that's why when you have marketplaces that own their own supply chain, they can make you the promise, like Luke said, of I can make a purchase at 10 p.m. at night, and I can have the item delivered to me at 6, 7, 8 o'clock the next morning. I think where this gets really interesting is where the world is moving towards. in the sense that in most markets, or most probably, everybody is talking about LLMs and AI, and what happens with AI essentially disintermediating the marketplaces. And as I sit here today, I believe that marketplaces who own their supply chain, like Amazon, they have a hedge against these AI platforms, because there's no way that an OpenAI or Anthropic, whoever, is going to want to invest in a supply chain. They're not going to buy warehouses. So at the end of the day, or not at the end, Luke's point about convenience is really interesting. I'll go a step further in saying that if you're a platform that has a loyalty program like Amazon Prime, or like what Tesco's has in the UK, that plus significant eyeballs, plus the store network for people to either collect their products or have trucks that are basically delivering goods to consumers daily, that is going to lead to people buying from you because of that convenience. But it's also a fact of, they know that the item is going to be delivered, because that's the scale that the business has. And I think that's why the current conversations about LLMs are so interesting to me, in the sense that it's great for these software platforms to create this new way for people to find and search for products. But the LLM doesn't, they don't have, they don't own a supply chain. They could potentially partner with a 3PL, but the marketplaces are going to be a part of the conversation, because they own the last mile, which leads to consumers like Luke just saying, you know what, even if the product is not the cheapest, I don't particularly care. I know the item's going to get to me. And I think that's why you see all the marketplaces like Mercado Libre, like Amazon, like Alibaba, insert pretty much all the big marketplaces. That's why they've invested in supply chain, because that makes you much more significant for the consumer, because the consumer knows that the item will be with me, whether it's on the day with like Coupang in South Korea, or it could be next day, or like next afternoon, like what Luke experiences in Europe. That is what humans want to know, that if my credit card is swiped or it's gone through a payment channel, I want to know that in 12 hours, 24 hours, whatever, I'm going to have the item in my hand. Otherwise, you'll get into your car and you'll do the thing that most people still do, is you'll drive to the shop, you'll go buy the item, and you'll walk without. But if you know the item's going to be delivered to you, then you don't mind paying a bit more. So Luke's point about convenience is really important, because that's why these marketplaces continue to evolve, and that's how they survive, because they have a larger selection than brands. They have supply chains that are larger than what brands can have. And as soon as you put those two things together, you have a value proposition that consumers will want.
Great. Yeah, so yeah, we can always do like the ancients, right? And go to the supermarket and buy things. We, we, we we have one question I put here, because you're talking about AI. So from Rafael Berti, he can't join now, but let me just read it. So, how do you see LLMs positioning themselves as search engine for products, bypassing marketplace as the go-to place to start product search? So, you talked about a little about that, Luke, but uh, Hendrik, sorry, but yes, Hendrik and Luke, do you guys have any idea if that's possible, or if that if these LLMs will be like the real search engine, and if it would be possible for them to bypass the marketplace, or do you guys think, let me just add this point to this question, do you guys think that it is more possible that these LLMs will partner with the marketplaces, because then you will have a much larger portfolio of products? Yeah, don't talk anybody, everyone at the same time, please. Come
So,
on.
so to answer your question, at the moment, where I'm currently at the position where I think we all need to just take a deep breath about LLMs and agentic commerce. I think we all have different ideas of how agents are going to help people buy stuff. So that for me is point number one. Point number two, I see an analog for this with, every year we see Google or announce that, they're doing something new with commerce, and, you know, it's interesting for like all of 2 minutes, and then, life goes on. I go back to the point that I made a couple of minutes ago. If you are in the commerce space and you don't own the final mile, or, you don't own the supply chain part of it, yes, you can become the discoverer, the place of discovery for brands. But at the end of the day, um you still need the final mile. And as much as all these AI companies want us to believe that they can put an AI into a warehouse, warehouses unfortunately need humans and products to move goods to consumers. So I think that's why there's been an investment in supply chain. But as I said, it'll be interesting to see what they do, because as I if there's a credit card being swiped by the consumer inside an LLM, are we then thinking about this is like affiliate commerce plus plus, in the sense that, they will send the transaction to a third party to complete because they don't have the supply chain? At the moment, nobody really knows what the answer is to this question. I just tend to believe that marketplaces with supply chain have a considerable advantage over these LLMs because they can supply the product. And consumers essentially want the trust and the perception that when I swipe my card, I'm going to get it in 24 hours, 2 days' time, whatever. LLMs at the moment, we have no idea how the purchasing flows are going to look after it leaves the LLM. I have no I think we can all admit to that there will be some discovery being done by these LLMs. There's no way it's not going to happen. It just happens. What happens when the transaction happens? Because we all have been there when your credit card is being swiped, and then 24 hours later you still don't have the product, and now you're starting to think like, what the hell? Do I need to contact my bank so that I can do a chargeback or whatever?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and like I see, like I think 10 years ago, when I remember my e-commerce agency, we built some stuff around Alexa and voice ordering and using and that world. So it's ordering in alternate channels is not a new concept. Again, most of the people that we are dealing with at the moment, they've got sometimes 10 different ways to shop with them. Could be their own e-commerce website, their app, their call center, walking into store, endless aisle, and then they've got products available on multiple other marketplaces. So the interesting thing is, and I do genuinely, I look at someone like a Shopify, 4+ billion stores around the world, the work that they're doing with Shopify Collective, the ability for you to have a Shopify merchant and then go around and select products from all these other Shopify merchants and have them on your website. And, you can kind of sit there and build a bit of what does that integration actually look like, and how do things flow around? If you were to put a LLM on top of that Shopify fed into with all their products across all their merchants and all those different kinds of things, you know, it always gets back to whose throat am I choking when it goes tits up and it's not going well, you know. And half the thing is what remember the old saying, Hendrik, logistics wins the war. You know, it does. I mean, and I think a lot of the time when I'm talking about doing my last minute purchases, do you know who it's usually for? It's from a 10-year-old, you know. And again, I love the boy, but it's usually for a reason. It's like, oh, my wife and I are looking at each other going, I thought you were buying the costume for school. I was like, I thought you were. And then you're, you know, suddenly flying around on Amazon trying to find a, you know, Roman centurion costume that has to be, and you know, if you don't get it delivered, you're ultimately going to have an upset child, you know, and then, you know, that kind of plays out from there. So not knowing where it's coming from, not knowing how I'm actually, because if you think the Shopify example, all Shopify merchants, every single Shopify merchant, there's consistency. It's got Shopify, but what plugins, apps that they use to do their logistics and who they're actually using for their last mile, wildly different. You know, does someone offer same day fulfillment, next day delivery? You know, just, you know, what's my idea of fast is wildly different. So yeah, I think it's so unknown at the moment. And who do you go to when it's gone wrong? Is there a global call center that you run by an LLM? You ask a question, it tells you stuff. Like I don't know. I'm still interested to see where it goes, but at the same time, take a breath for a second. Having different sales channels is not a new concept.
Correct.
Yeah, and Amazon had that it's old, but they had that button, right? That you could like get that button. I think they used a lot at the beginning with that Tide right, for laundry, and you could just press the button and it would order to your Amazon account and get to your home. And they have ended with that, but that was way simpler than going to an LLM or going to getting your phone app and ordering and etc. That was and that ended also. So it's I think at the end it will goes right to consumer behavior, right? Where people want to buy. At the end of the day, it's where people want to buy, where people want to as you said, swipe their cards. If it's an LLM, so the I think the market will run to that. If it's in Google, it was not, and market would go there. And okay, so guys, we have 1 hour and 7. We need to wrap up. So let me thank Luke for your participation. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much. And Hendrik, thank you very much. And please let us know where people can find you besides the Evolve community, but LinkedIn and your blog and your podcast. So please let us know where can we find you.
So the best way to find me at the moment is just LinkedIn is the most easiest way, because so that's there. Then I have a newsletter. The easiest way is to just do a Google search for my name. You will find it's blog.haimrich.com, or Vinny O'Brien and I have a podcast. It's called the Ostrich Report, the Marketplace podcast. That is at the moment the best way for you to reach me. You're also welcome to send me a WhatsApp message via the community, because the WhatsApp network is fantastic. And yeah, thanks to everybody that listened to me talk. This was really interesting. I hope I provided some answers to this question. I doubt we'll ever have a real definitive answer, but I think at the end of the day, this is the kind of conversation that I'm hoping to see more of. But also, once again, just a massive thank you to Carlos and Gustavo for having me in the community, because this is not your normal community.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Hendrik, for being here. You're a great member. Thanks, Rafael. Thanks, Jean. Thanks, Luke. And see you in the next week, guys. Bye-bye.